This is CultureCast. I'm Nova Safo. On today's program, the human cost of family separations.
2 women from my cell were separated from their children. We sat next to each other in the cell and cried together and asked God to give us strength.
The toll of children separated from parents illustrated in stark testimonies. And on a completely different subject, have you spotted new trends in food this summer?
The croissushi, which is basically a salmon roll wrapped inside croissant dough.
We're getting ever more creative with our summer foods. That's CultureCast coming up.
CultureCast is a production of Chicago Radio Works. You can subscribe on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, or the TuneIn app. You can also listen on our website, culturecast.org.
Welcome to CultureCast. I'm Nova Safo in Chicago. We covered the family separations at the U.S.-Mexico border on our last episode. That was the policy of the Trump administration adopted this past spring to separate parents and children in order to criminally prosecute the parents. More than 2,600 children, we now know, were separated this way. About 500 or so still remain separated as we record this episode in mid-August. The policy itself, though, has been reversed. The humanitarian crisis it has caused has not ended. We've heard about the politics, but not much about the people affected. That's changing because of legal filings in federal courts, which offer us a chance to read testimonies submitted to judges. We don't know the names of the people involved, but their stories are powerful. Now, normally this isn't something we'd cover on a culture program. But culture is about collective understanding, and hearing stories that illuminate human experiences is a key part of that, especially when it comes to something that just happened and is such an important marker of our cultural history. So we're going to start today with a few excerpts from the testimonies submitted as evidence in court. Here are the migrant stories read by actors who are reciting court filings verbatim.
When I interviewed one mother, she began to sob, shaking uncontrollably. She said she stayed strong for approximately 30 days away from her child, but that having her hope dashed that she was going to be reunited with her child that day was simply too much for her to take. I spent close to an hour with her before she was able to stop sobbing. A legal coordinator for a Texas nonprofit, in testimony under oath.
G is 15 years old and originally from El Salvador. In her home country, G was being threatened by a member of a criminal association. G and her mother fled to the U.S. Immigration officials at the border took them to a place G calls the ice box. They told her mother that G would be taken to another place. G and her mother said goodbye to each other while crying, but G's mother comforted her, saying she was going to visit her wherever she was going. Only later did G realize this was not true. As she recounted this moment, G was sobbing and visibly distraught. A declaration by a Washington state investigator.
The officers made me bathe my daughter and put oversized clothes on her. My body was shaking, and I felt like dying. Instead, I tried to be strong for my daughter. I told her she did not need to cry, that it would only be a couple of days that they would take her. Then they told us that would be as far as we would go with our children, and they made all of the children stand in a straight line. The youngest child in line was about 5 years old, and the oldest was about 12 years old. There were approximately 10 kids, and the youngest ones were crying. I had no idea where they were taking her. Only 2 women from my cell were separated from their children. We sat next to each other in the cell and cried together, and asked God to give us strength. Testimony of a mother separated from her daughter.
M looked scared. He looked absent. He did not seem to capture that he was with me. He would only stare. He continued to cry when we got home and would hold on to my leg and would not let me go. When I took off his clothes, he was full of dirt and lice. It seemed like they had not bathed him. M is not the same since we were reunited. Testimony by a Salvadorian mother reunited with her less than 2-year-old son after 85 days apart.
The testimonies of migrants filed under oath in federal court. Coming up on CultureCast, we're going to switch gears and examine our evolving summer food culture. Stick around.
A number of organizations are helping migrants at the border. The Texas-based Refugee and Immigrant Center for Education and Legal Services offers free legal help. The group accepts donations at raicestexas.org. The Young Center for Immigrant Children's Rights advocates for unaccompanied minors. Donations at theyoungcenter.org. Kids in Need of Defense provides legal representation to migrant children. Go to supportkind.org and click Donate. And the Asylum Seeker Advocacy Project represents entire families that cross the border. The group accepts donations at asylumadvocacy.org.
You're listening to CultureCast. I'm Nova Safo in Chicago. And during the summer here in Chicago, everyone is outside. We don't take the warm weather for granted here. Trust me, because of our brutal winters, we love it when the sun is shining. And one of the most distinguishing things about summer in Chicago is the food. All the barbecues, all the ice cream during lazy summer evenings. But when it comes to summer foods in general, that's just the beginning. I spoke earlier with CultureCast's food editor, Sasha Woodruff, who's been tracking new food trends this summer.
We're talking about like weird mashups. Like we had the croissant donut, the cronut, which is basically taking like deep frying a croissant. But then one of the other things that we're having, the croissushi, which is basically a salmon roll wrapped inside croissant dough.
Oh my gosh.
This is, I guess, raw sushi wrapped with a croissant dough.
So this is a new thing that's just debuted this year?
Yes, it's Mr. Holmes Bakehouse in Los Angeles.
And do you know if this is catching on elsewhere? Are there other similar mashups?
We have other mashups like cereal milk. Have you heard of this?
No, I have not. I mean, the two things go together and you eat them out of a bowl. Is that what you're talking about?
Remember when you were a kid and you had cereal and, it, by the time you got to the end, the milk was flavored?
Oh, it was like heaven, the best part.
Right. And so like drinking that milk that was like infused with all the sugar and the artificial flavorings,
Yes.
and it was like a little color to it. Christina Tosi, she's a really well-known American chef. She's the owner of Momofuku Milk Bar.
And where is that?
That's in New York.
Oh,
so
okay.
she started this trend, which is where you soak Fruity Pebbles or Fruit Loops or cornflakes in milk like we did, but instead of just like drinking that out of the bowl, she strains it out, and then you can use that for a base like things like panna cotta or ice cream. So then you have like this Fruity Pebble infused panna cotta or ice cream, which, I'm a little opposed to like the boxed sugary cereals, but I have to say this one kind of sounds appealing to me.
Sounds appealing to me too. I remember my Fruit Loops, my bowl of Fruit Loops and milk, and when I was a kid, and absolutely, I can totally get why this is a thing.
Yeah. So the other thing that is happening right now, poke bowls. So poke means to slice or cut in Hawaiian, and they're basically like a bowl of rice with sliced, like usually raw tuna or salmon on top. So it's
very sort of like sushi, basically.
It's like sushi. And, actually in Japan, they have something kind of similar, which I'm going to assume that this is how it ended up in Hawaii.
Over in Hawaii.
Right. So they do home style sushi, which is like you basically use like the vinegared rice, and then you put like raw fish and seaweed and other flavorings on that. And it's home style sushi. You just don't do the rolls, but you still have the vinegared rice. And so
Okay.
I think that the poke bowls are probably a play on the home style sushi, but we're seeing more and more of these restaurants pop up, and chains are kind of making it across the country. So I wouldn't be surprised if you'd start seeing that in Chicago.
Basically, these poke bowls, I guess, are a summer dish because Why? I mean, it
Well,
sounds kind of
because it's
it sounds heavy for summer, frankly.
Really?
Yeah.
No, I mean it's like it's a light, refreshing. You're dealing with fish and some rice, and
Okay.
I think they're very refreshing. And
I kind of think of raw fish foods like sushi and stuff as actually kind of rather heavy because you have all those fish oils,
yeah, but when you're just flavoring it with like light things like vinegar or lemon, then for me it seems like a lighter thing. I mean, if you have a fish in a cream sauce, that's a different thing.
Well, yeah. So what other types of summer dishes are coming out right now?
Smoothie bowls, which they're basically like, think of like a blended fruit in a bowl topped with like strawberries or coconut or nuts or acai berries. Those have been around for a while, but those are also big. So then you're eating it with a spoon, which I don't know. How is that different than sorbet or ice cream? I don't know, actually. So, and then the other thing that you could put in your smoothie bowl is fermented oatmeal. So it's basically leaving your oats overnight. You soak them with like yogurt and some juice, and then that kind of kickstarts the lacto fermentation process that actually happens naturally if you haven't pasteurized juices or something. Like that process will start from the sugars, but now like fermented oatmeal is kind of a thing, which is also another trend that's actually really big right now, or fermented foods, because there's actually a lot of really good scientific research that good gut bacteria, which, can be helped by eating fermented foods, can really affect a lot of diseases, including a lot of autoimmune diseases. So anything fermented is really big this year. We're talking kimchi, sauerkraut, pickles, that you would do with like the lacto fermentation process, which you actually do with a saltwater mixture as opposed to vinegar. So anything that's fermented is big. And so I guess oatmeal is just the next iteration of that.
I did not expect us to be talking so much about fermented foods as summer foods. So that's a big surprise. Are there other types of surprises, things that people might not have thought about as summer cuisine that we should be trying out this year?
Okay, so another thing that is becoming really popular is rolled ice cream. Like, I have to say, it kind of reminds me of like that Cold Stone trend where they took the ice cream and they spread it out. Apparently, they used some chemical to help it be cold, but they'd spread it out and then they'd scoop it back up. Anyway, this is sort of the same thing, but they basically take an ice cream base and then they pour it onto like an incredibly cold surface, like negative 15 or 20 degrees. And then there's a guy that takes a spatula and kind of starts like folding it over. It's kind of like this intense process where they're just like, they're folding and then they put ingredients in it and they like kind of chop it like right in front of you on this very cold surface. And then it starts to freeze and crystallize. Once it's like kind of frozen and all mashed together, they take it and they kind of scoop it. It just naturally rolls. It kind of reminds me of like doing chocolate rolls. Like if you like ever take a potato peeler to a piece of chocolate and it'll make those little rolls. It kind of looks like that. And then they serve it up into like a taco shell that is basically a waffle cone.
I know we've talked about smoothies in a bowl, but I hear you want to talk about milkshakes.
Yeah, so freak shakes. They're these massive over-the-top shakes. They're like, think of your shake that you used to have as a kid, or at least as we were kids. But these are like huge
I remember them
things
well.
with like whole cookies or pieces of cake on top and like tons of candy. They're actually really visually beautiful. But I have to say, I don't think I would want to try one. They look disgusting. And as my teenage niece said, it's like the height of American diabetes culture. She's a wise woman. Because it's just like sugar on sugar on sugar. Yeah.
And is this everywhere? I mean, is this like super popular right now? Because I haven't personally seen these yet.
So
these
it's popular.
shakes.
Yeah, it's popular on social media. So they're kind of perfect for Instagram because they're so striking and beautiful. I think food styling and all of that is so important because you want people to know that you have had this like amazingly like crazy shake. And, there is a boba shop here in LA where they do these amazing like boba, the bubble tea. It's kind of like tapioca balls in tea, and they top it with like cotton candy and fruity pebbles, and they serve it with like ice cream macaron. and things like that. So yeah, just these over the top, like visually stunning things are, I mean, I think, you know, until social media is no longer, we're going to just keep seeing like things, people pushing that boundary.
Do you think it's social media fueled? I mean, would these exist if it wasn't something you were sharing on Instagram?
You know, I actually really, really do think that this is fueled by social media because we are so visual and we want people to see what we're eating. I mean, apparently, and I think you actually covered this, restaurants are changing their menus so that they're more Instagrammable and so that they can have more presence on social media. So, you know, as obnoxious as it is that diners are taking longer in the restaurants because they, you know, before they eat, they have to like style their photograph and then Photoshop it and then post it on Snapchat and Instagram and Facebook. You know, I think we are just going to see that trend continue, and I think people who are doing food, I think they know that.
Let's talk about foods that maybe deserve their reputation, and that is, you know, stuff that's coming out maybe from some of the innovative chefs that are out there right now. What are you seeing? So
watermelon soft served ice cream is really big. So I don't know if you remember at the beginning I said that food mashups are really big. Dominique Ansel, he's a chef that he is the one credited with inventing the cronut, which is basically a deep fried croissant. He has, you know,
can't tell if we should thank him or hate him for
right. That. I mean, it's proprietary. Apparently people tried selling a cronut and he went after them. Like, so you can't call it a cronut unless it's, you know, from him. But anyway, so he had a watermelon. He had a place in Japan called Watermelon, and he's bringing that now to New York, and they'll do soft served ice cream, like salt and pepper caramel ice cream. And his really big thing is that he serves there's a slice of watermelon, and then it has watermelon seed shaped chocolate on the watermelon slice, and then it's served with soft serve watermelon ice cream. So it's like watermelon on watermelon.
On top of watermelon. You'd think maybe he'd try a complementary flavor as opposed to the exact same flavor.
I would think so too. I mean,
maybe it works.
Maybe, I don't know, honeydew soft serve on top of the watermelon, but it seems to be really popular. So I'm going to kind of assume that it must be really good.
I can imagine it's popular because let's be honest. I love watermelon in the summer. It's the perfect summer fruit, and I love soft serve ice cream. I think it's one of those things that's endured for so many decades because it's just, there's something irreplaceable about it and simple and wonderful.
You know, I mean, I think that's, you know, one of the other things that we're seeing is just sort of like this new iteration. I mean, I think soft serve ice cream was something that you thought of. It wasn't very high end, like, and I think people are kind of rebranding it and making it cool again.
All right, Sasha Woodruff, our food editor out of Los Angeles, thank you very much, as always.
Always a pleasure. Thanks, Nova.
And that's CultureCast for this week. Our thanks to actors Zamara Jimenez, Jaime, Soria, Debba, Rofheart, and Jim McCaffree. They provided the voices of the testimonies you heard at the beginning of this episode. And don't miss a single installment of our program by subscribing on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, or the TuneIn app. Search for CultureCast from Chicago Radio Works. I'm Nova Safo in Chicago. Thanks for listening.